My wife insisted on getting half of everything in the divorce, but as it turned out, none of it was truly mine. I'm 25 and had just begun my first real job a few months ago, working in my family's business. My parents had always been immensely supportive, and as their only child, I knew they entrusted me with everything. My life seemed perfectly aligned. Newly married, a dream honeymoon behind us, and a promising career ahead. My wife and I had recently returned from our honeymoon, a lavish escape to a tropical paradise. It was a mix of romance and adventure, featuring guided tours, scenic drives, and pristine beaches, or so I believed. After we came home, I spent an evening reviewing the photos and videos from our trip. Among them were clips taken from the rental car we had used, a habit I picked up from my father to document rental vehicles for any potential disputes over damages. What I discovered shattered my world. The footage was not what I expected. Instead of picturesque drives or candid moments, there she was, my wife, completely naked and entangled with the tour guide we had hired. The explicit scenes were unmistakable, and the location was our rented car, the same one we had driven. This happened while I was back at the hotel, making last-minute arrangements for the next day. I froze, my stomach churning as I clicked through more files. It wasn't a one-time mistake. There were multiple clips, each revealing the same betrayal. While I was busy, she had been sneaking off with him. This wasn't just cheating. It was a violation of what should have been the most sacred and cherished moments of our lives. That night, I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to think and process. As I reflected on our life together, I realized something unsettling. Almost everything we had wasn't actually ours. The house we lived in, owned by my father. The car she drove, registered under the company's name. Even the credit cards she used so freely, they were linked to accounts in my father's name. The only thing that truly belonged to me was the $25,000 I had saved from freelancing during my studies. She had no idea. She believed we were building a shared life together, but the truth was, I hadn't even started earning a formal salary. My parents wanted me to focus on learning the family business first. As much as her betrayal stung, I saw an opportunity to reveal her true character and protect myself in the process. The next day, I began gathering evidence. First, I backed up all the videos to a secure drive, creating multiple copies in case she tried to destroy them. Then, I consulted a family lawyer, a trusted friend of my father. I didn't inform my parents yet. I wanted a solid plan first. The lawyer assured me that since everything was in my father's name, she had no claim to any of it. In fact, her demand for half the assets in a divorce would completely backfire. But first, I needed to confront her. That evening, I casually brought up the honeymoon. "What was your favorite part?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She smiled, her face lighting up. "Oh, everything. The beaches, the food, the drives with the guide. It was all amazing." "The guide? Huh?" I replied, raising an eyebrow. "You seem to enjoy his company a lot." Her smile faltered. "Well, yeah, he was helpful." "Why?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and played one of the videos. Her face turned ghostly pale as she watched herself on the screen. "Care to explain this?" I asked coldly. Her excuses came immediately. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen," she cried. "I was drunk, and he took advantage of me." I shook my head, disgusted. "Don't insult my intelligence. This wasn't a one-time slip. You knew exactly what you were doing." She broke down, sobbing and pleading for forgiveness. Her tears, however, did nothing to sway me. I told her I wanted a divorce and that she'd be hearing from my lawyer. That's when her attitude shifted dramatically. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. "I gave up everything to be with you. You owe me." "Oh, you," I said with a bitter laugh. "Everything we have isn't even mine. It's my father's. You won't get a single cent." Her face twisted with rage. "I'll fight you in court. I'll ensure I get what I'm entitled to, she declared venomously. Feel free to try, I replied, standing resolutely. You'll regret it. Unbeknownst to her, my father was already aware of the situation. After consulting our lawyer, I shared the damning videos with him. He was furious, not only at her betrayal, but also at the sheer audacity of her entitlement. Without delay, he revoked her access to the house, canceled her credit cards, and began the legal process to detach her from anything linked to our family's name. She quickly realized this when her credit cards were declined, and she was locked out of the house the following morning. That's when the threats began. The next day, my phone buzzed incessantly with a flood of text messages. They ranged from desperate pleas for forgiveness to outright menacing threats. One message read, "If you think you can discard me like garbage, you're mistaken. I'll ruin you, and you'll regret this." Her manipulative nature didn't shock me, but this time, she was outmatched. Every card she thought she could play had already been countered. Still, I handled the situation cautiously. Rather than responding to her provocations, I forwarded every threatening message to my lawyer, who assured me they'd strengthen my case if she pursued baseless claims in court. Later that day, she arrived at my workplace, causing a commotion. I was in a meeting with my father and senior staff when the receptionist called. Her voice hushed. "She's here, and she's making a scene." When I stepped outside, there she was, shouting and demanding to see me. "You think you can just lock me out of my house?" she yelled. "You don't get to make decisions without me." Keeping calm, I responded, "It's not your house. Actually, it's not even mine. Everything you're clinging to doesn't belong to either of us." Her face turned crimson with anger. "You're lying? I'm your wife. I'm entitled to half of everything. Let's leave that for the courts to determine," I replied, signaling security to escort her out as I returned to the meeting. That evening, I had a candid discussion with my parents. My father, usually composed, was livid. She really thought she could manipulate us and walk away with what we built. She has no idea who she's up against. My mother, though visibly shaken, offered a gentler perspective. "You deserve far better," she said, her voice steady. "We'll make sure she doesn't succeed." With their unwavering support, I felt fortified. My father's legal team promptly drafted airtight divorce papers, ensuring every potential loophole was closed. Meanwhile, I compiled additional evidence to strengthen my position. As time passed, her behavior became increasingly erratic. She reached out to mutual acquaintances, spinning false narratives about how I was abusive and controlling. Thankfully, most of them saw through her fabrications. Some even shared stories of how she had openly boasted about her freedom during our honeymoon. Freedom that, in hindsight, was her affair with the travel guide. Her final gambit was to file for divorce, demanding half of our assets. In her petition, she accused me of emotional abuse and financial manipulation, claiming I had restricted her access to resources. But her arguments crumbled under scrutiny. During the initial court hearing, my lawyer presented irrefutable evidence. The videos, her texts, and financial records, all demonstrating that the assets weren't mine to begin with. The judge was unimpressed by her claims, particularly after her infidelity was exposed. Her attorney tried to argue that the videos violated her privacy, but my lawyer countered that the footage was lawfully obtained for rental car documentation. The turning point came when my father took the stand. The assets she's referring to, our home, our business, are entirely under my name. My son is still an intern, learning the trade. She has no legal right to any of it, he stated firmly. Her lawyer looked visibly defeated. She, however, seemed on the verge of an outburst. After the hearing, she approached me outside the courtroom. "You've destroyed my life," she spat venomously. "You'll pay for this." I met her glare unflinchingly. "You brought this on yourself. Enjoy the freedom you were so desperate for." Her downfall didn't end there. While I didn't actively tarnish her reputation, I didn't shy away from sharing the truth when asked why we parted ways. Word spread swiftly, and soon even her own family began distancing themselves from her. In a final act of desperation, she reached out, claiming she wanted to reconcile. But by then, her pleas were as empty as her loyalty. I disregarded her entirely. By then, the divorce was officially finalized, and she left with absolutely nothing, not even the empathy of those who had previously stood by her. With the legal proceedings concluded, I assumed that chapter of my life was over, but the repercussions of her actions continued to echo. Her reputation was utterly ruined. The travel guide, her accomplice in the affair, had already been dismissed from his agency once the scandal came to light. It turned out that I wasn't the only one with evidence. Another couple, whom we had befriended during the trip, had also observed her shamelessly flirting with the guide and shared their own recordings. When the rumors reached the agency, they swiftly terminated his employment, fearing potential liability. She was left isolated with no allies. Her family, once adamantly on her side, grew distant after uncovering the full extent of her deception. Her parents even reached out to express their regret, admitting they had been misled by her fabricated accounts about me. Had we known the truth sooner, we would never have condoned her behavior, her father confessed during the call. While I acknowledged their apology, I made it clear that no amount of remorse could undo the harm caused. As for me, life gradually began to stabilize. My parents, as supportive as ever, encouraged me to concentrate on my career. They offered for me to move back into the family home temporarily to regain my footing, but I declined graciously. I needed the space to rebuild my life independently. In one final act of precaution, my father restructured the family business, consolidating more of the assets under his direct control. "We'll transition everything to you when the time is right," he assured me. "But for now, let's ensure no one else can exploit us like this again." Months later, she made a desperate, last-ditch effort to re-enter my life. She appeared at the office, unannounced, looking disheveled and visibly distressed. "I've lost everything," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know where else to turn." I didn't even let her finish. "You made your choices," I said, walking past her. "Now live with them." Security promptly escorted her out, and that was the last time I ever saw her. Now, a year later, I can confidently say I've moved on. I'm flourishing in the family business, having earned my first official promotion. The lessons from this ordeal have left me stronger and more perceptive in my relationships. Trust is no longer something I take lightly. If there's one clear takeaway from this experience, it's this: entitlement and betrayal carry consequences. And sometimes, those consequences are the epitome of poetic justice. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this one.